Hey guys, it's Belle, and in this video, I'm going to be reading through and giving you some degree of historical commentary on a fun, enigmatic Old English poem known as The Ruin, which, if memory serves me correctly, the current scholarly interpretation as to what this poem actually means is that it is an early medieval English imagination of or reflection upon the Roman ruins at Bath, and the topic of bathing is quite indeed prominent in this poem. So, first I'm going to read it through from start to finish, and then we will go through and break it down line by line. Now, forgive me if my old English pronunciation is not too good, particularly if I get my long and short vowels mixed up, although I will try my best to remember because I was not able to find a version of this text with the macrons to help me remember, and I'm quite useless without those, so do forgive me. Ratlich is this whalestan, wyrde je brakkon, burgste de burston brosnath enta je weork, rofas sin je rorene, rerje torras, runjet beroven, rim on lime, sjarde sjurbergas gorrene, je drorene, aldo under the outene. Eort grab hafath walden wirchtan forwerane, je leerdene, heerd grippe hursan, of hun knä wertheoda je witan. Oft thas wag je bad rijhard on readvach rietje aftrotrum, of stonden under stormum. Steap jeap je dreas, one of years se whalestan wapnum je heawen, fellen grimme je grunden sjan heo. Orthonk aardjaft, lamrindum berg mod, swiftne je braid whatred in ringas, hierdof je bond, whale-wallan weirdum wundrum togadre. Bergt warlun burgratjed, burdenceremonie, heag hornje streon, herdesway Mitchell, meodo hail money, mondreama full, of that on wende wirdsel sweethe. Krungon walwide, quoman waldagas, swilt eil fornom, sedro frawera. Wurdon hyrra wigsdale westen statalas, brosna de burgstale. Beten krungon hergas to hrusan, forthon vas hofu dregriath, on vas ter for je patienum sjaadeth rosberget rof. Rirewong je krong, je broken to bergum, thar you bear money gladmod on goldbergt gleoma je fratwed, bolonk on wingal, we ristum shan, sheach on sink, on silver, on cerro yimmas, on ad, on acht, on erkenstan, on thus Berthenburg bradan leeches. Stan hovus dodan, stream hatte werp, weedan wilme, wel el befeng Berchten bosme, tharfa bathu waran, hot on reithre. That was hitherleach. Leighton thona yeotan over harnestan hatte streamas, of that ring mer hatte tharfa bathu waran. Thona is, that is Kunelich thing, husse, burg, etc. So, as you could see from the ending there, and also several other bits of this poem, this, as with many Old English poems, is actually somewhat fragmentary, so we won't be able to fully, unfortunately, know what all of these words meant, but nonetheless, we can still get most of the meaning of this poem. So, let's get on with it. Ratlich is this whalestan, wyrde je brakkon. So, Ratlich is like wrecked or like defeated. Is this whalestan? Is this wall stone? Wyrde je brakkon? Broken je brakkon by fate. Wyrd. That's that famous concept of the weird deriving from the pagan days of this kind of fate, this destiny that binds everything. Burgstede Burston. The boroughsteads literally, or the city places, have burst apart. Brosnath enta werk. The works of giants decays. Now, this word, by the way, Burston, is kind of interesting, right? Because it's not the kind of thing that we would normally associate with ruins. This like bursting, this like having lost life. But if you look at it from the perspective of early medieval English people who would have seen these stone buildings, which would have been quite rare, although they would have had stone buildings in their landscape as a result of the churches that were founded by missionaries there. So they would have seen these stone buildings which would have had wooden roofs, and then they would have seen these Roman stone buildings which may have been partially decaying, and they would have had, by that point, no roof, and obviously they would have had no stuff in it. So it's also possible that some of the rubble had been strewn in a sort of circumference around, say, the bathhouse or whichever Roman building had been decayed. So one can quite easily imagine early medieval English people coming across Roman baths or Roman stone buildings, and the rubble has spread out a bit, and it could be quite easy for them to imagine, this is the place where the giants live, and everything just like burst apart. There was like an explosion from this, maybe some kind of giant magic or whatever, and that's why this building has been ripped apart. And that's why it says here, enter your work. So this theory that the inhabitants of Britain prior to the early medieval English-speaking people were in fact a race of giants is a thing that the Venerable Bede, among others, has popularized in his book The Ecclesiastical History of the English People, where he says that Felix Brutus came to England and founded a race of, or sort of cultivated a race of giants there. And this is one of the explanations that medieval English people had for the Roman ruins that were there in Britain. So, that little bit of context for you. Rofas sind gehörene. The roofs have collapsed. Reriet horras, the ruinous towers. Runiet behoven, the bereaved round gate. Rim on lima, there is frost on its limbs. Sjerde Sjurberge skorrene. Beautiful lines here. Sjerde Skurberge skorrene. The shorn and scored shower shelters Skurberge. Jedrorene. This means fallen. So these stone buildings which would once have provided shelter from the weather, these have all fallen down now. Aldo undereotone, having passed under their age. Now this word ald is interesting. I believe, unless I'm very much mistaken, it glosses the Latin word seculum, which can have really interesting uses, and I think that aldo has similar uses in that it can mean both an age in the sense of time, so the ildo man is the the age of men, or it can mean the actual physical world, and the distinction isn't always necessarily important. So this poem could literally mean both. So it could mean that the roofs, the towers, the round gate, and the shower shelters, that these have literally gone under the world, and they've been buried under the soil and the earth is absorbing them. Or it can mean they've been buried by the world, by time, by the passage of time. And I think that ambiguity is meant to be deliberate in this poem because it is both at the same time, right? And let's go on to see what they say next. Earthgrap hafath walend wirtan forwerane jelorane hergrip hruson. So, Earthgrap Waldend, the ruling or the powerful earth's grip, and maybe this lends the interpretation to the former that it's actually Aldo means that the roofs and the towers have been subsumed under the soil rather than by time. So the ruling earthgrap has Wirten for Werane, the decayed works Jelerdane, and the deceased works Hergrip Rusan, the earth in its hard grip. It's really dramatic language here. Of hun knea wertherde witan, until 100 generations of the wertherde, the man people, Yawitan have departed. So perhaps this is meant to be, because if a generation is going to be, say 20, 21 years-ish, give or take, let's say 20 years, give or take, and then we have 100 of those, then that's going to be 2,000 years. So this might be the poetic way of saying that the poet thinks that these Roman ruins are 2,000 years old, give or take. Very exciting. Oft thas wagyabad raihar on readfach. So often this wall awaited Raiha, lichen grey hair, and Readfach, so red stained. And I just love that the language there. So it's like, lichen hoary and red stained. Riche after Odrum. It awaited a kingdom after the other one. So it is awaiting for a new ruler, a new sort of people to occupy and use these buildings after the last one that was occupying it, which of course is no longer there. That other one probably being the kingdom Enta of the Ents, of the giants who used to live in Britain, according to early medieval English legend. Aufstanden unter Sturm, the wall which was established under the storms. Steap, yap, yedreas, the tall and crooked wall collapsed. So we get this beautiful image of the wall, perhaps even a wall which has been pushed over by the elements, just bending and then finally collapsing and falling in on itself. Wanath yet a whaleson, wapnum yehawan. The wallstone wanath yet, it stands yet, wapnum yehawan. It has been hewn by weapons. So the wallstone, the stones at the base of the wall around the city, they are still standing, even if the actual individual buildings within the Roman town have decayed and fallen away. So the walls are there, wapnum yehawan, having been hewn by weapons. So even though the weapons of warriors are trying to break through these walls, there is still this degree of protection there. And actually, the archaeological evidence does confirm that in early medieval England, particularly after the mission of Augustine of Canterbury, what you have is you have the development of towns beginning firstly around minsters, but also in certain areas you had early medieval English people reusing the Roman walls to provide natural defence for their petty kingdoms, to set up marketplaces and emporia to protect those from pillages and raids by other petty kingdoms. So within the walls of former Roman cities such as London, or I think not maybe Colchester, perhaps York, there's a couple of other places where this happened, you have former Roman walls which provide the skeleton around which early medieval English people rebuilt cities and started to create more permanent trade settlements in these areas. So this poem is basically pointing out, like, hey, the rest of these buildings have fallen in, but the walls are still there, and they've been hewn by weapons. So people have tried to get in, but they've not been successful at getting through this wall. So the wall still has some protective power, and it seems that this protective power, which we can see having been exploited in the archaeological record, seems to have left a mark on the early medieval English emotion and consciousness as well. Fell on grimmige grundan, Sean. It fell onto the grim ground, onto the grim floor. Sean hail, and then this means something Sean, but we don't know. It cuts out. We can't know what the rest of it is. Orthunk Arshaft, the skillfully wrought relic. And again, we have another ellipsis, we just don't know what's here. Lamrindum berg mode. So what I'm sort of translating this as is, and scholars are divided on this, of course, is that the mind caved underneath these lam rindum, which means the lamed shields, so shields which have been made useless, and this might imply that there are the remains there of shields which have been broken up after battles and then just left on the field where they had been used, or perhaps even ritualistically lamed and disposed of so that they couldn't be used again as part of a ritual destruction of these artifacts, which we often see with, say, swords being bent in this period and thrown into rivers after a battle. So there might be something there. But Bergmord means the mind bent. And again, we have these ellipses, so we don't really know what the meaning is here, unfortunately. It's really unfortunate. So then we have Swiftness braidd chwatred in Ringas. The what's the word? Or, I drew a new design, huatrerin ringas, in the rings into the churches. So, or I think what this is the mind design, the Abraith, Swiftna huatrerin ringas, a new design conceived of in rings. Now, this could in fact be a reference archaeologically to the fact that, I'm forgetting precisely where this is, but in certain archaeological contexts from early medieval England, or they might be called Anglo-Saxon settlements, we see an attempt to recreate circular buildings in wood, resembling the ancient Roman colosseums, where, of course, they would have gladiatorial combats and theatres, and these semicircular wooden theatres being constructed. So, this, the mind caved and designed, came up with a new design in rings. This could refer to this attempt to replicate Roman theatres in wood, which would be really, really interesting if that were actually the case. Hero Fiabond, well walan wirum wundrum togadra. The the man renowned for his mind, Hierof, here can mean mind or imagination or thought, and Rolf being famous. Yabond, he bound. Well, Walan, the wall, well, the bottoms of the walls, basically. Weirdum wundrum together, with wires wondrously together. So he marvelously bound the bases of these walls, which, remember, the poet is keen to tell us are still standing, even though they've been hewn with weapons. He binds them together, perhaps even to form this kind of circle using metal wires, which is really interesting. Maybe this is a substitute for rope. Bercht waron burg ratchet. The city halls were bright. So presumably this means that once this man with a brilliant mind has put these wall pieces together into a circle with wires, the settlements are revived and they have cities there again. They have meetings and mead halls there. So we have the Berg waren Burg Ratched. The city halls were bright. Burden and Molia. There were many mansions. Herk Hornjestreon. The high horn heaps, so many drinking horns put together. And notice this, Hornjestreon is quite an interesting image, right? Because I've got a video talking about cups in Beowulf and how these drinking vessels, which you can't set down, are used to mediate social relationships between people. So I think having this here as a symbol, you have, these piles of these horns, indicates that they have piles of horns because they're frequently going to have multiple guests around who they're going to distribute horns to during the feasts. And this, of course, is going to be indicating that the society that is living in these Roman ruins is going to be a very big one. It's going to be a society that's often entertaining a large number of guests and therefore is full of life. So I think there's significance to the heaps of horns that we have here, such as these figures here are drinking out of. Herasway Mitchell, there was a great war cry, or just like the sound of an army. Meora hail money. Many a mead hall, Mondream full, filled with the dreams of men. And it's really interesting that they actually use the rune in the manuscript for Mon, not the actual, not spelling out the word itself in Latin runes. So there's this really interesting interaction of runic culture with the monastic Latin literary culture as well. So cool to see this here. And I believe that the rune as a poem actually might have its origins as early as the 8th century or 9th century, rather than the 11th century where it was written down in, I believe, the Exeter book, but don't hold me to that. So this could be one of the means in which we identify that it indeed comes from an earlier date, besides other linguistic clues that might remain in the text. So what we had these bright city halls, many mansions, the high heaps of horns, the great battle cry, many a mead hall full of the joys of men, of that until that on wende wirelsail switha, until mighty faith sort of cast that away. So fate has come again. So just as these walls were broken by faith, Wirdi Brakon, they were broken by fate, sorry. Wirdi Svita, the mighty fate has on Wenda overturned all of it. Now, there's one of two different interpretations. One can say that the poet is narrating how the poet comes across these walls that have been broken by fate. The poet and their society restores these walls, puts wire around them and brings them back to life, and then fate comes and takes it all away. Or when it says, Hero of your bond, a sort of famous man bound the wall together, that this is referring to the walls before they were broken by fate. And here the poet is reminding us, this was all great. They had the high heap of horns, you had the many mead halls, etc., until fate came to destroy it, to take it all away again, which is very sad. But there we go. And when fate came to take it all away, which we might recall sort of echoes certain themes that we see in Beowulf. So Beowulf says, Garth Wirth Swa Seos shall, something like this, let fate go as she wish, before Beowulf goes off, I believe, to face Grendel. And at Beowulf's funeral, we have a Geat woman singing about how now that Beowulf is gone, there's going to be destruction and pillaging that's going to befall her people. And we see this sort of theme coming in now, where like once fate has entered and taken away the protection that these walls once offered, we get all of these terrible things which we're about to see. Krungon Walawida, the slaughters widely came to pass. Quaman Waldagas, the death days. Waldagas is such a cool word. Swult el fornom sej rafra wera. Death, the complete death. So complete and utter death. Fornom sej rafra. It took away the more battle renowned shed rafra wera of the men. So battle took away the better men from this society because they were brave and they died in battle, whereas the more timid men, such as might be represented by Unferth in the poem Beowulf, as opposed to Beowulf himself, who goes into battle and dies, and he would be one of the Sejrofra, because of that process wherein the cowardly men live and the weak men, and the strong men, I should say, die. This poet is lamenting that, like, unfortunately, in these times of slaughter, the more valiant in battle were taken away by death. Wurdon hirda wigstehal western statalas. Their bulwarks, Wurdon, they became western statalas. They became abandoned places. Now this is again echoing a really fascinating theme seen in the lament of the Geat woman at Beowulf's funeral, where she laments that now that their lord has been taken away, their strong, battle-renowned leader, all of these things like debasement, enslavement, and slaughter are going to come upon the Geat people. And we see exactly the same fear being echoed here, because now that death has taken away the men who are more courageous in battle, now that that's happened, their fortresses and their bulwarks have become abandoned places. So this is linking the idea of people to place in a way that a place is only so good, or maybe even the protection of Roman walls is only good while it has the ingenuity and the courage of masculine men protecting those physical spaces. And when those men have been taken away, everything will fall apart and collapse and become a ruin. And then we have these last two words of this sentence, Brasnada Burgstale, the city fort perished. So once the warriors are dead, the fort cannot survive. Betin Krungon Hergas Tohrusan, the edifying armies, Betin, the improving Hergas, the armies, Krungon, they perished, Tohrusan, into the earth. Now, this idea of Betin is really interesting, and also linking it to Hergas, right? And this is one of the reasons why some historians believe that this poem is making reference to Roman ruins in particular, aside from the fact that there would be relatively few stone buildings, particularly stone ruins in early medieval Britain, because new stone buildings in the form of churches would have been still probably in use and still in good standing. So most of the ruins would have been stone buildings that had been built in Roman Britain and had since fallen into disrepair. And many of those buildings would have been from Roman cities which had evolved themselves out of military forts, such as I believe Eboracum was one of them. And therefore, the armies, having come in and founded these cities, would be perceived as almost the improvers, the builders, the edifiers, and the carpenters who literally would make these cities out of initially wood and then stone. So this is why there's this association here of the armies as betend, of like, improving things and helping out, because the Romans came in and they improved the buildings. They would repair buildings in stone, etc. And now those armies have fallen into the dust. So there's this image here, and there's a couple of ways this can be read. This can either be read as purely the Romans falling, the Roman armies falling into the dust, or it can be a reference to early medieval English armies that have come in and have tried to revive Roman living, who just happen to be overturned by fate and they fall into the dust. It's hard to say. Forthon thas hofu dreariath, because of which thas hofu dreariath, these hooves are dreary. On thas terrier patielum sjarveth, rosberg trof. Absolutely beautiful words. Terrier patielum. Oh, it's lovely. Thus terrier, this arch, tielum, with its tiles, and this word, by the way, is tiel is a loanword from the Latin tegulum, which is for tile. Shadeth, it injures Rosbergtrof, the roof of the ring stave, essentially. So what I think is happening is that what it might be is that there was an arch from a building that was there during Roman times. That arch is now decaying, and beneath this arch there was a smaller building in wood with ring staves that was built perhaps even by the early medieval English, and the tiles from that are now falling in on top of this roof and damaging the wooden structure that's been built within the protection of the stone encirclement. This is just my personal theory. Rere wong ye krong, ye brocken to berogum. So the rere wong, the decaying garden, perish ye krong, ye brocken to berogum. This decaying garden perished, having been broken to bergum into hillocks, into little hills, basically, in the landscape. So this is, of course, a reference to the fantastic private gardens that wealthy Romans would have in their villas, having now been broken up and they're just an ordinary part of the landscape. Now, this might seem almost counterintuitive and non-macho to us today, that a manly Germanic warrior would concern themselves with taking care of a garden, but for whatever reasons, perhaps because of its association with Romanitas, you need a lot of wealth to be able to maintain a garden. In post-migration era literature, we can see a great emphasis on maintaining a garden as the sign of a great masculine, manly ruler. And in my video, The Ostrogoths Were Queer, towards the end of that video, I break down a poem by Magnus Felix Enodius, which is praising the Ostrogothic King Theodoric, who is going to be a Germanic, quote-unquote, barbarian, like the people who were writing and passing on these kinds of poems. So Theodoric, according to Enodius, has a beautiful garden, and Enodius describes this through the lens of all sorts of sexual metaphor, essentially describing Theodoric as very macho, masculine. He is a top, basically. Theodoric is a top, so being able to maintain a garden is the most manly thing, not the most manly thing, but one of the most manly things you can do in this kind of literature. So, fellow men, take note if you want to improve your manliness. Learn to garden. So, but the fact that, or rather the reason that this decaying garden falls into little and decays into these little hillocks is because the more battle-worthy men who might have provided the resources necessary to maintain a garden, they are now gone because battle has taken them in the slaughter days, unfortunately. So, the decaying gardens collapse, broken into hillocks. Thariu Bairn money, where previously in days of yore, Bairn money, many a man glad mod, happy minded on Goldbercht and gold bright. So this is probably referring to just them being adorned with gold, like having a lot of gold, being very wealthy. Gleoma ye flatwed, sort of adorned with splendor, gleam, or with the glisten and the gleam from their gold. Volonk on Wingal, proud and wine drenched. I love this word, Wingal. We Hristum Shan. Many a man shone in the trappings of war. So many a man shone in the trappings of war. He was happy minded, gold bright, adorned with shine, proud and wine drenched. And this reference to wine is perhaps another indication that this is referring to Romans here. So they're imagining the Romans in all of their massive wealth, because bear in mind that so much of the gold and the treasure that would have been circulating and which petty kings in early medieval England would have fought over would not only have been made by the Romans, but they would have known this. Like this would have an artistic style to it, and it would have the legend of Roman emperors on the faces on. So they would have some kind of sense that these are the Romans who made all of these glorious things. They might have found many Roman coins in these ruins, as archaeologists find coins in Roman ruins to this very day. And they would have had this association that, oh, the men who made these glorious things, who you can see their faces drawn on these coins, they would have been so happy and gold bright. They would have been proud and drenched in the finest wine like Romans like to drink, you know? Seach on sink. He gazed upon his treasure, this many a man who was in these halls, these Roman dwellings, on silver, upon the silver these men would gaze on serogimas, upon the gemstones, on Erd, upon his wealth, on Echt, on dominion, on possession, on Erkanstan, upon a precious stone, on Vas Berchten Burg Bradan Reaches, upon this bright city of the broad kingdom. So, what it's saying is the decaying garden collapsed, broken into hillocks, there where previously many a man, happy-minded and gold-bright, adorned with shine, proud and wine-drenched, shone with the trappings of war, many a man gazed upon treasure, silver, precious gems, wealth, possession, dominion, gemstone, and upon the bright city of his broad kingdom. So this, again, broad kingdom referring to the broad Roman Empire, because in early medieval England, before, before the, I believe, 900s or 800s really, or even 700s, what you have are these petty kingdoms that don't really have a great territorial expanse and don't have many men under their control, and the kings are just strong men who have no real dynasty per se. Their kingdom only lasts as long as they and maybe their son is able to keep the kingdom going by charisma and by being able to distribute enough treasure to keep warriors on their side. And it is only later, I can't remember who was the first Bretwalder, it might be King Egbert who was the first Bretwalder, but this idea of like a broad ruler, somebody who's able to rule over a broad area, doesn't come into being until much later. So this reference to a Bradan Liches, to a broad kingdom, is surely a reference to the Roman Empire, which they would have known was massive and spanned a large portion of the world, if because of nothing else than sheer rumour and legend that the Romans would have at this point passed into. So, Starnhovu Stodan, the stone hooves stood. Stream hatte werp widan wilme. The stream twisted fiercely in with its wide welling. So this is probably referring to the poet's imagining of what the bards would have looked like back in early Roman times. Well el befang berchten bosme. The wall the entire wall encompassed the stream, Berchtan Bosme, in its bright embrace. Thartha Bathu Maron. There the baths were hot on Rethra, hot in their warmth, basically, hot in its embrace. That was Hitherich. That was a convenient thing. So it's saying that there was a stream that brought in water for the baths, and that was awfully convenient. And of course, it wasn't convenient. The Romans planned to build it there, but the poet's having a bit of license here. Leighton thonna Geotan over Harnestan had the streamas. So they then allowed it, Geotan, to be poured over Harnestan over a hoary stone, the hatestremas, the hot streams. So they allowed the hot streams to be poured over a grey stone, and then we have an ellipsis, we don't know what it says, of that until Ring merda hatte, the ring ditches hatte, the hot ring ditches, Tharda Bathu Waron, are there where the baths once were. So what this is implying is that there is some degree of stone architecture behind these baths that the Romans had set up, but now that they have decayed and the stone is maybe overgrown with lichen and stuff, it just appears as a ringmer, as a ring lake. It just seems almost like a natural part of nature in the landscape because it has, Yedror and Aldo, it has fallen to the earth, it has been subsumed under the world, quite literally. Thona is, then there is, and again we have an ellipsis, we don't know what it says. That is Kunarich thing, that is a fitting thing. Husa for a house, and then it cuts out. We don't know what the rest of it says, unfortunately. So, wow, there we go. I should probably have a go at reading this through from start to finish, just to give you guys some kind of idea of how this poem works. Because I know I talk a lot in between giving my translations. So, this wallstone is wrecked, broken by fate. The burrowsteads have burst. The giant's work lies decayed. The roofs have collapsed. The ruinous towers, the bereaved rune gate, there is frost on its limbs. The scored and shorn shower shelters have fallen, having passed under their age. The powerful earth grip holds the foregone and decayed, deceased works. It holds the earth with its harsh grip until 100 generations of the man people have departed. Often this wall awaited a kingdom after the previous one. It awaited grey, lichen-coloured and blood-stained, set up under the storms. The tall and crooked wall collapsed. The wall stone still stands yet, having been hewn by weapons. The foul one shone upon the grim ground, and then we have an ellipsis, the skillfully wrought relic, and then the mind caved underneath the lamed shields, and then this mind, the mind conceived of a new design, envisioned in rings. The man famous for his mind bound the base of the wall marvelously together with wires. And after he does this, the city halls were bright. There was many a meeting place. There was a high heap of horns. There was a great battle cry. There was many a mead hall filled with the dreams of men, until mighty fate overturned that. And when mighty fate overturned that, the slaughters came to pass far and wide. Death days came, and complete death took away the most battle-hardened of the men. Their bulwarks became abandoned places. The city fort perished. The improving or edifying armies fell into the dust. Therefore, these homes are now dreary, and the arch damages the ring-staved roof with its tiles. The decaying garden has fallen down, broken up into little hillocks, where once many a man, happy-minded and gold-bright, adorned with shine, proud and wine-drenched, shone in his battle trappings. He looked upon treasure, on silver, on precious gems, on wealth, on dominion, on the gemstone, and on the bright city of his broad kingdom. The stone hose stood, the stream twisted angrily in wide wellings. The whole wall embraced it with its bright embrace, where the baths were hot in their enfolding their embrace. That was convenient. Then they let the hot streams be poured over a greyish stone until the hot ring ditches stood where the baths once were. Then that is a fitting thing for a house. And then the poem cuts off, unfortunately, and we can't know what came at the end of it. But there we go. That was the Old English poem, The Ruin. I hope you guys enjoyed reading through that with me. That was a long one, but it was really interesting, and I quite enjoyed reading it with you. If you want me to teach you Old English or any of the other languages I do here on this channel, you can subscribe to my Patreon, which will be linked in the description of this video. You can also join my Discord server, where we sometimes do free language learning activities as a server, and even things like movie nights. It's quite fun. So the links to that will be in the description as well. You can come and join us. Until next time, like, comment, subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a nice day. Bye, everyone.